So imagine you go to a counselor, right?
Hmm.
Because your anxiety's gotten so intense, it's literally causing severe chest phlegm.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah, you feel like you're physically choking on your own stress. So you finally sit down, you ask for a spiritual or psychological cure, and the grand, profound advice you receive is, uh, go get a 9 to 5 job.
Right. Which sounds like a joke, or maybe just, terrible advice.
Completely.
But when you actually unpack the mechanics of what is happening in that person's brain, I mean, it might be the most scientifically sound prescription possible.
And that is exactly what we are decoding for you today. Welcome to this deep dive.
Glad to be here.
We are exploring the hidden mechanics of human consciousness and mental well-being. And we have an incredibly unique stack of sources to do it.
We really do.
We're looking at direct audio counseling recordings of real people dealing with, profound grief and bizarre psychosomatic anxieties, plus philosophical texts on achieving inner freedom.
Right. And we're also looking at the raw, unfiltered autobiography of a spiritual teacher named Sri Bhagavath.
Which is a wild ride. But what makes this collection so compelling is that it completely strips away all the mystical jargon.
Yeah, it's not about abandoning your life to go meditate in the Himalayan cave. It's really a highly practical manual for debugging your own mind, using real, often very messy human examples.
Absolutely. So the mission for you today is simple, but it's huge. We want to figure out how to aggressively separate what we can control from what we can't so you can actually function in the real world.
Exactly.
But before we get into the guy choking on his own anxiety or the other audio recordings, we need to understand the basic operating system these sources are using. It basically boils down to a philosophy of inside versus outside, right?
Yes. The core framework running through all these sources is the concept of agam versus kuram.
Agam and Puram.
Right. And these are terms that perfectly map onto modern psychology. Agam refers to the strictly internal world. So this is your mind, your thoughts, your passing feelings, your fears.
Okay.
And Puram is the external world. It's your physical environment, physical actions, just the tangible things you do.
So internal reality versus external reality.
Mm-hmm.
Seems basic enough. But the teaching in the source material applies this really extreme rule to the division.
It does. The rule dictates that whatever happens internally, so in the agam, must be met with complete unconditional acceptance.
Like total acceptance.
Right. Any thought, no matter how disturbing, or any emotion has to be met with a mental okay. The sources literally advise you to internally declare, I am right, or this feeling is correct, just to instantly stop fighting yourself.
Okay, wait, hold on. If I wake up furious for no reason,
Mm-hmm.
or I'm gripped by irrational panic,
Yes.
the advice is to just internally say, yep, I'm terrified and I'm completely right to be terrified.
Yes.
I mean, isn't that just validating a delusion?
Well, what's fascinating here is that it sounds like it, but mathematically, it's about reducing friction. Most of us operate in a state of psychological civil war.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
The sources point out that human suffering is generally rooted in 4 basic feelings: fear, anger, sorrow, and desire. The biological response to those feelings is natural, but the actual suffering happens when we resist them. So you feel anxious, and then your brain gets angry at you for being anxious. Or you feel sad, and you judge yourself for not being positive.
Ah, so it's the meta emotion, like the feelings about the feelings.
Exactly. That resistance creates intense psychological friction, and as one of the audio sources explicitly points out, fighting your internal reality creates a biological stress loop that literally leads to physical illness.
Because cortisol just floods the system.
Right. The source actually mentions a caller who developed a stomach ulcer entirely from this internal friction. So by saying, I am right to feel this, you aren't validating a delusion, you're just dropping the resistance.
You let the feeling exist so it can naturally pass.
Precisely.
Okay, I get that. But if I just accept that I'm angry, what stops me from, throwing my laptop out the window?
Well, that is where Puram comes in, the external. Internally, you give the emotion total permission to exist. But externally, you must take whatever practical, constructive action is necessary.
Okay, let's unpack this. It's like driving a car in a terrible thunderstorm, right?
Okay.
Internally, you don't roll down the window and scream at the rain to stop. You don't try to punch the weather. You just accept, okay, it's raining. But externally, you don't take your hands off the wheel. You turn on the windshield wipers and you keep driving.
That is a perfect analogy. You do not police the internal weather, but you absolutely drive the external car. Confusion happens when we mix them up. Like when we try to control our internal thoughts, or when we just surrender and stop taking action in the real world.
So if that's the theory, how does it hold up against raw, devastating human suffering?
Yeah, it's the real test.
Let's look at the first audio recording. It's a heartbreaking call from a woman named Uma, living in Tambaram. Her 31-year-old son recently died of a heart attack, and he left behind a 2-year-old child.
It's just incredibly tragic.
She is completely shattered. She's read all these spiritual books trying to find detachment and inner peace, but she is just drowning in pain.
And if you listen to the counselor's response, it's basically a masterclass in this Agam and Puram concept.
Because a lot of modern self-help would lean into toxic positivity here, right? Telling her to focus on the good times or find the hidden blessing.
Right, but the counselor does the exact opposite.
He tells her that even a Nani, which is a term for a fully enlightened wise sage, feels profound sorrow when a child dies.
Exactly. He is entirely validating her Agam. He tells her that crying is not a failure of her spiritual practice. Crying is biologically and spiritually correct.
Wow.
He literally says, right now, thinking of your child brings tears. That's exactly how it should be.
So by stripping away the spiritual guilt, like the idea that she should be at peace, he actually gives her permission to just grieve.
Yes. The mechanism here is crucial. When she judges her grief as unspiritual, she layers immense guilt and frustration on top of her crushing sorrow. By applying that total okay to her internal state, she stops the civil war.
That makes so much sense.
The counselor assures her that if she stops fighting the tears, then over time, naturally, thinking of her child will bring happy memories instead of just agony. He tells her to let the internal storm rage without trying to turn it off.
Okay, so that's profound grief. But what happens when the problem isn't a tragic life event, but a strange glitch in our own physical body? Because the next audio caller is dealing with something completely different.
You're referring to George from Nagercoil?
Yes. So George actually cured his severe depression and some physical twitching a few years ago by attending a Nana camp. Can you quickly explain what that is?
Sure, a Nana camp is essentially a spiritual retreat focused on self-knowledge and understanding the exact mechanics of the mind we're discussing today. George learned to accept his internal state, and his depression lifted.
But now he has a new, highly specific problem. He has become completely obsessed with the physical sensation of swallowing his own saliva at night.
Right.
It's causing him to overthink, he feels like his throat is closing up, and he's suffering from severe insomnia.
Yeah, in psychology, we call this a psychosomatic loop, or sensoromotor OCD. It happens when you hyper-focus your conscious mind on an automatic bodily function.
Like breathing or blinking.
Exactly. Breathing, blinking, swallowing. These are managed by your autonomic nervous system. The moment you start manually monitoring them, you interrupt the natural biological rhythm, which creates panic, which makes you monitor it more closely. It is agonizing.
So how does the Agam and Puram philosophy fix a swallowing loop?
Well, the counselor advises George to accept the sensation as God's action. Now, regardless of your religious beliefs, the psychological mechanism here is about removing the ego and the effort from the equation.
Okay.
He's being told to take his conscious self out of the driver's seat of his throat.
And to help him do that, the counselor gives him a specific audio track called Iriarol Dainam, or Grace Meditation.
Precisely. That meditation acts as an external anchor. It gives his mind a specific Purim task, listening to the audio so his attention is pulled outward. It stops his mind from cannibalizing its own internal processes.
Which brings us perfectly to the 35-year-old unemployed civil engineer. This is where I really started laughing when I read the source material.
Oh, it is an incredible case study.
So this guy calls in, he's 35, supported entirely by his father, and he doesn't work. He spends all day, every day, just sitting around monitoring his own mind.
Just idling.
Right. And he claims this intense mental focus is causing chest congestion, severe phlegm, and dizziness. He is literally choking on his own overanalysis.
Yeah.
And the counselor starts by giving him some breathing exercises, right? Something called pranayama.
Yes, pranayama. It's a system of structured yogic breathing. Mechanically, it shifts the nervous system from a sympathetic fight or flight state into a parasympathetic rest and digest state.
Okay, that makes physical sense.
The counselor tells him to do this for his throat for 30 minutes, twice a day, and to surrender his fear to the total mind.
Okay, wait, total mind, is that just a fancy mystical term for giving up control?
Basically, yes. It's a way of describing the wider subconscious or even universal consciousness, as opposed to the narrow, hyper-focused ego. The counselor is essentially saying, your tiny conscious brain is trying to micromanage your lungs and your throat. Stop it. Hand the controls back to the larger system that already knows how to run your body.
So he gets the breathing exercises, which makes sense. But then the counselor delivers the ultimate prescription. He tells him he needs to go get a job.
Yeah.
Any job. even a low-paying, trivial job, just to stop idling.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's completely pragmatic, and neurobiologically, it's brilliant. Think about the default mode network in the brain.
Right, the system that runs when we're not focused on a task.
Exactly. When we don't have an external task, our brain defaults to self-reflection. If you have no external demands on your attention, no Purim, your mind makes you its job.
Wow.
It turns entirely inward and starts magnifying every tiny somatic sensation. A normal throat tickle gets analyzed until it feels like suffocating phlegm.
So action literally cures overthinking.
Yes. Getting a job forces his attention outward. It requires him to engage with the external reality. The spiritual solution to his psychosomatic phlegm isn't to sit in a room and meditate harder. It's the structure and external demand of a 9-to-5 schedule.
Okay, I love that. But if action and grounding yourself in reality is the cure, what happens when someone does the exact opposite? What happens when someone takes deep meditation and spiritual detachment to an extreme? Because the sources give us a truly terrifying example of this going wrong.
Yeah, you're talking about the call from Chennai, Sritan.
Yes. Sridharan calls in and describes a situation that sounds like a horror movie. 20 years ago, he got deeply into Vipassana meditation, which is a very intense, silent, observational meditation.
Very intense.
But he pushed it so far that he started having literal out-of-body experiences.
Mm.
And it permanently altered his baseline reality. Even now, 2 decades later, when the weather gets cold, his mind becomes severely disturbed, his asthma flares up, and he gets this overwhelming, terrifying urge to just run away into the night.
He essentially induced a severe dissociative state through extreme meditative detachment.
And the sources compare this to artificial intelligence experiments, specifically mentioning a project called Google Opal. Can you explain how AI relates to a guy wanting to run into the woods?
It's actually a brilliant metaphor for how we train our consciousness. Think about how we train an AI model. If you train an AI in a completely closed, simulated environment, like a vacuum with no variables, it will perform perfectly in that vacuum.
Makes sense.
But if you take that same AI and put it in a self-driving car on a chaotic, busy city street in the rain, the system will throw a fatal error and crash.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. So Sridhar trained his brain in a sensory deprivation vacuum.
Exactly. He trained his operating system to completely detach from physical reality. Now, when he is faced with a dynamic, chaotic environment like cold weather or an asthma flare-up, his brain throws an error. It defaults to the only extreme response it knows: dissociate and flee.
It's like jailbreaking a smartphone. You bypass the factory settings to access hidden features, but in doing so, you disable the core security protocols, and now your phone randomly shuts down when you try to open an app.
Precisely.
But here's where I have to push back. Sridharan's instinct is to suppress these terrifying urges to run away, and the counselor tells him not to suppress them. He tells him to accept the urge.
Yes.
Hold on. If a guy is in a dissociative state and feels the urge to flee into the night, telling him, just accept the feeling, sounds incredibly dangerous. How is that good advice?
It sounds dangerous until you look at the mechanism of suppression. The urge to run is the agam, the internal feeling. If he fights the urge, he creates massive internal panic. He is basically telling his brain this feeling is a lethal threat, which spikes his adrenaline and makes the urge to flee even stronger.
So it's a feedback loop.
Exactly. By fully accepting the terror without acting on it, he removes the secondary panic.
So he accepts the urge internally, but externally, he doesn't actually open the door and run.
Correct. And crucially, the counselor tells him to completely drop the extreme detachment techniques. He is offered a life-oriented meditation instead. The goal of true spiritual practice in this framework is called agamiya karma.
I saw that term in the text. What does it actually mean in practice?
A lot of people think of karma as a mystical point system where you are punished for past lives, but agamiya karma is immensely practical. It refers to the reality that the actions you take today in the present moment shape your immediate future.
Okay.
It's about grounding yourself in the real world. True spirituality isn't meant to make you run away into the night. It's meant to enhance your daily life.
Okay, so this whole philosophy of radical internal acceptance and practical external action is fascinating. But I kept wondering while reading this, who figured all this out? Who is the master handing down this incredibly grounded, get a job and stop jailbreaking your brain?
The wisdom.
You read this stuff and expect the author to be someone who was born floating on a lotus flower, radiating perfection from birth.
You would think so. But the reality of Sri Bhagavath's life is much more entertaining and honestly much more useful for the rest of us.
Okay, you have to tell me about his origin story, because reading his autobiography, Bhagavath Payanam, was wild. This guy was a menace.
He really was. He was born in a rural village called Kayamozi. And he was not naturally academic, nor was he particularly pious. What he had was a fierce, almost aggressive competitive streak and a massive ego.
Like the track team story.
Yes. When he was in school, a physical education teacher completely ignored him during selections for a 1,500-meter race. Bhagavath felt slighted. He didn't care about running, but his ego couldn't handle being overlooked.
So what does he do?
So he secretly trained in the deep sand dunes near his village for a month to build up his stamina. Then on sports day, he enters the race and absolutely crushes the state's top runner.
Out of pure spite.
Pure spite. And it wasn't just sports. By the 5th grade, he was chain smoking. While other kids were studying, he was writing detective novels in the 8th grade. He was openly rebellious and even got into physical altercations with his teachers.
Oh, you have to explain the watch story. That was my absolute favorite detail.
The watch story is a perfect illustration of his personality. Bhagavath's father wore his wristwatch on his right hand. The father's logic was actually a great anger management technique. If he got furious and wanted to strike someone, having to stop, use his left hand to unbuckle the watch and take it off, would give him a few crucial seconds to cool down.
A built-in pause button. It's actually really smart.
It is, but Bhagavath, being a total rebel, deliberately wore his watch on his left hand.
Of course he did.
One day, a teacher rushes at him in anger to hit him. Bhagavath raises his left arm to block the strike. The teacher's hand smashes into the watch, the strap snaps, the watch shatters and flies across the room. Suddenly, the whole fight is completely derailed because everyone is scrambling on the floor trying to find the broken pieces.
It's hilarious, but it just paints a picture of a kid who was constantly in conflict. And academically, he wasn't doing any better.
Academically, he was a disaster. During his pre-university course exams, he orchestrated a massive cheating operation.
This part is crazy.
He literally had a tailor sew a secret pocket into the inside of his dhoti. He hid cheat sheets, he called them bit papers, between his legs. He practiced exactly how to look down at his lap without moving his head so the invigilators wouldn't catch him. He did this for 4 massive science exams, and he still failed English and science.
It's just unbelievable. So I'm looking at this text and I'm thinking, how does a chain-smoking, exam-cheating, aggressive teenager who fails his classes transform into a spiritual guide whose teachings cure psychosomatic illnesses? It feels like a total disconnect.
This raises an important question, right? It feels like a disconnect, but it is actually the most important mechanism in the entire source material. If Bhagavath was born perfect, his teachings would be useless to us.
That's a fair point.
His messy youth proves that inner peace isn't reserved for the naturally well-behaved. It goes back to that concept of agamiya karma. You are not permanently bound by your past mistakes or your delinquent nature. Your current actions can entirely rewrite your trajectory.
So what was the catalyst? Because you don't just go from hiding cheat sheets in your pants to achieving enlightenment after a good night's sleep. What actually changed him?
It started, as many profound psychological shifts do, with a harsh moment of social rejection. After he failed those exams, he was walking out of a movie theater in a nearby town. He spotted a former schoolmate, a guy who was a year senior and had successfully made it into medical school. Bhagavath enthusiastically called out to him.
And the guy just completely ignores him, right?
Basically, yes. The medical student gives him a dismissive, rushed hello, and hurries away, clearly not wanting to be seen with him. Bhagavath felt deeply humiliated. He realized in that moment that he was perceived as a failure, a nobody, while his peers were moving up in the world.
So his ego takes a massive hit.
Exactly. That humiliation sparked a fire. He decided right then that he's going to make something of himself. He locked himself away to study for his English re-exams, and while he was studying, he read a book that served as the true catalyst. It was a required text for his class called Workers for Humanity.
Specifically, the story of Leonard Cheshire.
Yes. Leonard Cheshire was a British pilot who flew as an observer on the mission that dropped the atomic bomb on Nagasaki in World War II.
Wow.
Cheshire was so deeply haunted by the scale of the destruction and his proximity to it that he radically changed his life. He dedicated the rest of his years to opening homes for the dying, the disabled, and the incurably ill.
I can see how reading that would be a shock to the system for an arrogant teenager.
It dismantled his ego armor. For Bhagavath, reading about a man who carried the literal weight of atomic destruction and yet still managed to channel that immense guilt into profound service, it shifted something fundamental inside him. He realized that his rebellion was just a mask for his own fear of inadequacy.
The text mentions he used to take these long walks at sunset out in those same sand dunes where he trained for the race out of spite. And during one of those walks, he makes a decision. He doesn't just want to be successful anymore to prove people wrong. He wants to live a life of service.
Notice the transition here, because this is where Agam and Puram come together perfectly. The internal drive, that intense energy and desire for significance, was still there. He accepted it. But the external application, the Puram, shifted entirely from selfish rebellion to selfless service.
And he proved it with radical external action. He actively stripped away his intimidating persona. He shaved off this thick, aggressive mustache he loves so much. He fought a massive battle with his traditional family to become a vegetarian. He stopped wearing flashy clothes and switched to simple, white, cuddy, homespun cotton.
Shaving the mustache wasn't just a grooming choice. It was the physical mechanism of dismantling his ego. He aligned his physical reality with his new internal goal. He later met a Gandhian named Munyandi, who deepened his commitment to social work, and he began devouring the teachings of Ramakrishna and Vivekananda. He fundamentally rewired his own operating system long before he ever taught anyone else how to do it.
It is incredibly grounding. When you look at the whole picture we've covered today, from the weeping mother to the anxious engineer to the cheating teenager who became a teacher, the through line is so clear.
Accept the internal storm, but keep your hands on the steering wheel externally.
Exactly. Whether you are dealing with profound grief that takes years to naturally turn into happy memories, or weird midnight anxieties about swallowing, or if you're just feeling like a failure who got left behind by your peers, your past doesn't trap you. You don't need a perfect track record to start debugging your own mind today.
And you certainly don't need to flee to a mountaintop.
Right. Sometimes the most deeply spiritual healing thing you can do for your mind is to just go get a job, do some breathing exercises, and stay firmly planted in the real world. Let the internal weather do what it wants. Just keep driving the car.
That is the essence of inner freedom.
Which brings us to a final thought I want to leave you with today. Something for you to mull over as you go about your week. We spend so much of our daily energy trying to fix or hide or apologize for our feelings. But what if the biggest obstacle to your inner peace isn't the chaos of the outside world, but your constant exhausting effort to police your own emotions? What would happen if, just for today, you gave every single emotion, the anxiety, the sadness, the frustration, total, radical permission to exist while you simply focused on the road ahead?